Hi, my name is Mrs. Carpenter, and this is Grammar and Composition 901. And so every week you're going to have a different unit, and in that unit you'll have at least one, if not several different videos, and then you'll also have worksheets and activities that correspond with those videos. I do suggest taking some notes, that way you can refer back to your notes. If I put it on the board, it's probably important, and that way when you need to refresh your memory, you don't have to refer back to this video and try to find where and when I said it, but you can refer back to your notes. And so this unit, we're going to talk about the library and manuscript form. And I just want to kind of give you an overview of the library. That way, when we do stuff as research papers and book reports, things like that, that you can utilize the library as best and efficiently and effectively as possible. So each library has one of two systems. They use the Dewey Decimal System, which is a numbering system, or they use the Library of Congress classification system, which uses alphabet and Arabic numerals to find your subjects. And then every library has an index of these catalogs. They store on a computer, and it's called an online catalog. And on this online catalog, there are going to be there's going to be 6 different things that are going to tell you about that book. So it's going to tell you the author or authors, everybody who was involved in writing the book. It's going to have the title, and these are going to be arranged alphabetically based on the title. And then it's going to have a subject. So if you are looking for a specific book if you're doing, say for instance, you're doing a research paper on Abraham Lincoln, you can go to the subject, and then there's going to be a little spot where it says keywords. You can put in different words that are going to bring up to help you narrow down your search. So you can write keywords, and you can write, say for instance, you can write Abraham Lincoln, you can write 16th president, you can write presidency, different keywords, making sure that we just utilize those keywords and not like the 16th president of the United States. We just want to put in those special keywords. It also have a call number, publication information, that's going to be your publisher, the date that was published, and this is important because you want to make sure that the information that you are researching is the most up-to-date information for you. And then it's also going to have the number of pages. And this is also important because if you're doing a research paper on the Civil War and you find a book and it has 25, maybe 50 pages, that's not a lot of information. And so you want to make sure that you are utilizing the books the best to you for you. And then last, every library has a reference section, and these are important. They have to be accessible at all times, so you cannot actually take them out of the library, but you are more than welcome to go and use them. And in this reference section, there are 6 reference books. Your first reference book is going to be an encyclopedia. Say for instance, and those are alphabetically, so say for instance let's go back to the Civil War. You're going to go to the C encyclopedia, you're going to pull it out, you're going to find the Civil War, and there are going to be summaries of different articles that you can use. Next is dictionaries, and this is going to have the definition of a word. It's going to tell you the origins, how to spell the word, different things like that. And then there's special dictionaries, which are going to be like thesaurus. Say, for instance, you are doing a report on medicine, and you can pull out a medical dictionary, and that is just going to have just medical information, medical words that you can use. Next is atlases, and that's a book of maps. It's going to have charts and graphs and things like that as well that you can utilize. And then handbook of miscellaneous information, and that's going to be things like almanacs and different books like that. And then last is going to be a book of quotations, and that is self-explanatory. It is books of quotations, and there are specific books to use in order to look for those. So now that we have an overview of the library, I just wanted to kind of do that really quickly, and we'll kind of go a little bit more in depth when it comes time for book reports and research papers. That way, again, you can utilize the library as effectively as possible. So let's talk about manuscript form. So manuscript is anything that is written. So in this class, you will be doing a lot of writing. And so there are several rules to follow, basic rules when you are writing. So the first section we want to talk about are abbreviations and what's acceptable and what is not acceptable. So it is acceptable to abbreviate any title such as Mrs., Mr., Doctor, things like that. So you want to write Mrs., and then you want to make sure and write your period after the word Mrs., and then finish with Carpenter, or Mr. period Jones, Doctor period Smith. Next, let's talk about scholastic degrees. So any type of degree that somebody has earned. So for instance, BS stands for Bachelor of Science. So when you graduated college and you've earned your bachelor degree, you are going to write John Smith, and you're going to put a comma after your last name, and then B period S period. And that is going to be your title, your scholastic title that you have, degree that you have earned. If you are writing this in the middle of a sentence, you are going to write John Smith, comma, BS with your periods, and then you're going to add another comma at the end and continue with your sentence. So, or like Jane Doe, comma, PhD. Making sure again that we use those periods. Next, let's talk about junior and senior. It is acceptable to abbreviate the words junior and senior as long as you are using their full name. So for instance, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., again, we're putting a comma after his last name, and we're doing a capital J, lowercase r, and putting the period at the end. Let's go ahead and talk about Reverend and Honorable while we're right here. It is acceptable to abbreviate the words Reverend and Honorable, again, as long as you're using their full name. So you can't say Honorable with abbreviation Honorable Smith. You have to use Honorable John Smith. It has to be that full name. The other exception to this abbreviation rule is if you use the word the in front of the name. So you can't say the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and abbreviate Reverend. You have to write the and then spell out the word Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Moving on to AM, PM, M, which is midday or noon, BC, and AD. So you can use these, making sure again that they are capitalized and that there are periods after the A and after the M, and then also with the PM and the BC and AD. So let's look at a couple of sentences. We arrived at 8 a.m. By using this colon and the zeros after it, you've established that it says 8 o'clock. So you know you are arriving at 8 o'clock in the morning, a.m. You want to make sure that you aren't repetitive. So this sentence says, we arrived at 8 with the colon and the zeros, o'clock, a.m. in the morning. So by utilizing this, you've already established that it's o'clock. So we need to go ahead and take that out, omit that, and then again here, a.m., you've already established that it's in the morning, so you are just being repetitive. Go ahead and take that out. If you wanted to use the words o'clock and in the morning, you could spell out the word 8. You could write 8 as it's spelled, and then write 8 o'clock in the morning, and that is acceptable as well. And then with BC and AD, you want to make sure that BC comes before your numbers. So remember this, BC stands for before Christ. So you want to go before your number. So BC 773 came before 95 AD. And then an easy way to remember this is AD for after death, and that means it's going to go after your number. Moving on, it is acceptable to abbreviate well-known organizations, so like YMCA, FBI, USAF, things like that. You do not have to put a period after each letter, and it must be capitalized. Last, we are not going to use anything besides the word and. So we aren't going to use a plus sign or any other symbol that sometimes we shorten for the word and. We're always going to write it out. Moving on to rules about numbers. So in a non-scientific writing, you're going to spell out numbers of 1 or 2 words. So for instance, 20, 37, 5,000, anything like that, one or two words. The exception is when you're talking about a year or anything referring to a book. So for instance, in 1976, moving on, and then you can write in chapter 9 using the number 9. So within a limited context, and you've used several numbers, some should be figures and some should be written out. You want to use figures for all of them if they pertain to the same category. So, for instance, let's look at this sentence. Of the 226 positions available, 200 were already filled out 2 weeks before. So we've used 3 different numbers. We've used the number 226, we've used the number 200, and we've used the number 2. We are talking about here the positions. So we know that there's 226 positions, but 200 were already filled out. So that's the same subject. So we're going to make sure and we use figures for that because it's pertaining to the same thing. But down here, 2 weeks refers to the weeks. It's not pertaining to the positions. So we're going to spell that out. We also do not want to start a sentence with figures. You don't want to write out 3 of the 16 using a figure 3. We want to make sure I'm going to spell out 3. We always want to start a sentence with a word. We want to write out words such as first, second, and third. We aren't going to write first like this, second like that, third like that. If you're doing a paper and you say, first we went to the store, we're going to write out the word first. Second, we drove through the park. We're going to write out second. Third, we went home. And again, writing out that word. And then street names, anything under 100, we preferably write out the word. So we write 2nd Avenue like this. Moving on, last I want to talk about dividing words properly at the end of a line. So there are times that you'll be writing and you don't have enough space at the end of the line and you need to move to the next line on the next below it. So there are rules that we must follow in order to write correctly. So we don't want to divide 1-syllable words. So for instance, hissed is going to be, it's 1 syllable, we're going to keep it together. We're either going to write it at the top or we're going to write it at the bottom. We're not going to separate it. We want to make sure that we're pronouncing words correctly. So we're going to divide at the correct pronunciation. So for instance, prejudice, we want to write prejudice. We don't want to write pre-Judas because that changes the whole word. Then your reader is going to have to take a few seconds to understand what you're trying to say. So we want to make sure that we keep the pronunciations together. Next, we also don't want to divide after a single letter. So like you wouldn't just write enough with E and then a hyphen enough. You want to keep those words together. We want to have several different letters before we have to hyphenate. You want to divide words with the prefix. So for instance, postgraduate. Your prefix is post, and you want to make sure that you keep the word post together and graduate. So you wouldn't do postgraduate. You would make sure and put the prefix first and then continue with the rest of the word. Then when let's talk about dividing between, if you have a double consonant. You want to make sure and divide in between those consonants. So recommend, you want to divide between the 2 M's. You want to put the two M's together and then finish with the end. And the only exception to this rule is for suffixes. So for instance, the same rule applies for prefix, it's going to apply for a suffix. So thrill is a double L, we're going to keep that together, and then we're going to hyphenate it and put the suffix at the end. And then lastly, words that are already hyphenated. We already have a hyphen, we don't need any more. So we're going to hyphenate at the hyphen. So for instance, self is going to go self-composed. Composed is going to go at the bottom. You're not going to write self with the hyphen, come with another hyphen, posed. It's too many hyphens. So we want to make sure and we're keeping the hyphens together. So these are just basic rules that you need to know when it comes to manuscript and what we expect.